So this morning I was on Good Morning Britain, daytime TV show, and we were talking about things that do or don't make you proud to be British. And one of the presenters, Richard Madeley, suggested that the UK's response to the war in Ukraine is like an obvious reason why everyone would be proud to be British. And it seems to tie in to a narrative in the media that says there are only two positions you can have. You can either support Zelensky and want to send him weapons and want to encourage his military efforts, or you must be a big fan of Putin. That those are the only two positions you can have. But in fact, there is a third position which myself and loads of people I know live in, which is that we support peace. And there are only two ways that the situation in Ukraine can end. And one is that we escalate and we escalate and we escalate and we send more and more weapons to Zelensky and to Ukraine, and indeed troops get sent from around the world, and we escalate and escalate. We throw more and more bombs at Putin, and he conscripts more and more Russian civilians to go and fight in the war. They end up getting killed. He conscripts more people who often unwillingly are sent off to fight and put their lives on the line. He throws more and more bombs at the situation, and it goes backwards and forwards, with us always helping Zelensky to escalate, until at some point Putin runs out of weapons, runs out of people to conscript, and then he hits the nuclear button. And the only other way that this war can end is for people to sit around a negotiating table and have peace talks. And that can happen now, or that can happen in 6 months' time when several countries have been flattened. So it's better if it happens now. In fact, it's better if it happens as soon as it possibly can. And the response from Richard Madeley and from people around the media seems to be, well, Putin won't agree to peace talks. But we're not sat at that table, so you can't complain that Putin isn't there until you're sat at that table. And yes, of course, he might refuse to negotiate, he might refuse to be reasonable, he might refuse to offer anything in return for what's being offered, he might refuse a temporary ceasefire, he might refuse all sorts of things. But you've got no moral high ground until you're sat at the peace table asking for that to be the case. And it puts me in mind of the fact that we rely so heavily on referencing the Geneva Convention, or who's broken the Geneva Convention. And the Geneva Convention, and I'm kind of massively paraphrasing because I'm also talking about the Hague Convention of 1899, the Hague Convention of 1907, and indeed the Geneva Protocol. All of those things are structures around what is and isn't allowed in war, who you are and are not allowed to kill in war, how you are and are not allowed to treat people in war. But none of that questions the sort of ability to actually start a war. And it's 2022. That shouldn't be something that's on the table. We shouldn't still be using violence, especially violence against civilians, violence among people who don't want to be involved in a war, damaging people's property, destroying people's livelihoods, damaging infrastructure, making people's lives unbearable and unlivable. That should not be an option for resolving conflict. And fascinatingly, I mentioned the Hague Conventions going way, way back to before World War One. One of the things that they suggested at the Hague Conventions was that there should be an international, legally binding arbitration court, so that countries who are unhappy about borders or disputes like that could go to this court and the outcome of it would be legally binding. And in fact, at that time, Britain and the US and Russia wanted this brought into force, and it was Germany who refused to sign it off, and that's why it didn't happen and wasn't brought into force. But here we are, over 100 years later. You know, Russia wanted this, and so did we. I'm pretty sure at this point Germany's on board as well. So surely this is the way that we have to move forward, is to put into place, and sometimes they're going to make decisions that aren't what we want. Maybe they'll decide that, you know, Crimea doesn't go back to Ukraine, but it's better for us to have a decision that is not 100% of what we want, but that leads to peace, than it is for us to throw bombs backwards and forwards until millions more people are dead, potentially everyone, in a nuclear winter. And interestingly, I was frustrated that that subject came up, and I hadn't thought to put on this morning my peace poppy. So usually when poppy season comes around, which we're just entering, instead of wearing a red poppy, I wear one of these, a white peace poppy. And now is if you're going to wear one, now is the time to get one. Now, I appreciate not everyone will want to. You might have family who are in the military or something like this, and you might have tradition of supporting the British Legion. I will say this, there's a lot of evidence that suggests that the Red Poppy campaign is often co-opted by people who actually are in favour of war rather than in favour of simply protecting those who are so often harmed by it and supporting those who've been in the military and may need help afterwards. The Peace Poppy is intended to support all those affected by war, including innocent civilians and all of the rest. And you can look up the really brilliant causes that they support on their website. They also, unlike the Red Poppy, have made their poppies completely biodegradable. They're entirely recyclable. There's no plastic in them. They're all cardboard. They're made by a collective in the UK, like a workers' collective in the UK. So they're ethically much more suitable to wear as well, if you care about any of those things. And if you have been thinking about getting a white peace poppy, now's the time to do it, because by the time everyone's wearing their red ones, you don't want to have to write off and get one. And I will put in the thing below a link to the white peace poppy campaign, which of course also in their material will reference what's going on in Saudi Arabia, what's going on in Afghanistan, what's going on in Ethiopia and Eritrea, what's going on in lots and lots of different parts of the world right now. And you can send your support as well for civilians and people being affected by those conflicts as well. So if you want to get one, I'll put that in the thing. Otherwise, thank you so much for your ongoing support. I like going on the TV and getting a chance to argue these things, but so often the conversation seems to be so skewed, and I'm really, really grateful to those of you who sponsor these videos and enable me to make videos talking about things from an angle that I think is fair and reasonable and not being interrupted. Your support is greatly appreciated. Thank you.